Well, a big hello to everyone and to the gentlemen on the podium. Our subject today is culture wars. Please welcome the culture warriors here on the stage. Or are you not? Is there a war? What is it about? Who is the enemy? Please give us a first glance at the subject, maybe starting with Gladden.
Thank you so much, Boris. Yes, there is a war, but I would say that people talk a lot about culture war, but really there is a war between culture and anti-culture. There's a war between the cultures that have been built over a long period of time, that have been transformed by Christianity and built into a real civilization, and there's the other side which wants to tear it apart. Obviously, if you can't build a community, if you can't encourage families, if you can't propagate yourself through time, if you're just dying and not planting the seeds that will make a culture continue, then it's really something like anti-culture. But I want to make one other comment about this, though, which is that, of course, it's the left which has been pushing the anti-culture, but they have understood something that the right has not, that conservatives have not understood, which is the role of politics and the law. I think conservatives know that it was Christianity and the classical cultures and classical civilization which built the cultures that we now have. And so we assume that we can simply continue them through typical cultural practices. But we've seen how quickly the culture can change when there are bad laws, when politics takes an anti-culture viewpoint and seeks to impose and transform the traditional cultures into something that we don't recognize. So we have to understand the role of politics too in providing support for culture, encouraging traditional culture, encouraging family formation. That's something that I think the right and conservatives weren't paying attention to for a long time, because we thought that we could just continue everything that we had without protecting it and defending it and actively using politics to encourage it. So I'm sure that's something we're talking about over the next hour, but I think it's a very important point.
Yeah, no, that's really true about the United States, where we come from, that people on the right, for most of our lifetime, I think leaders on the right have wanted to allow the culture to take care of itself. And it has been a disaster for us, really. We've won elections, but we haven't used political power in a way that would affect the culture in any positive way to guarantee the continuity of family and religion, the things that we care about. You know, you use the term anti-culture. That's a word that I first heard when reading Philip Rieff. Philip Rieff was an American sociologist who died about 15 years ago. He was a real prophet in the 1960s about the culture war and this cultural revolution that we've all lived through. He said that the sexual revolution, again, writing in the 60s, he said it was more important than even the Bolshevik Revolution, which, as an academic in the United States in the 1960s, was quite a bold thing to say. And he said that what a culture, any culture, requires is the ability to make certain things taboo, to say, thou shalt not. But the new culture that was rising in the 1960s, and that has now taken over, Rieff said that it was a culture that was based on forbidding to forbid. In fact, I think that was one of the sayings of the Soixante-Huitard in France, the 1968 generation. It is forbidden to forbid. Well, Rieff said this is what they're trying to do, to overthrow the old culture, the received culture, but it's not going to work because every culture has to have some taboos around it to distinguish it. Well, I think now they have succeeded pretty well in destroying the old culture, but we have culture war now because people can't actually live that way. Finally, I think that you don't have a choice but to be involved in the culture war, because you may not be interested in the culture war, but the culture war is very much interested in you. In the United States, most conservatives are classical liberals in the sense that they're happy to live and let live. Let us do our thing, you do your thing. But the left has become much more aggressive on that point, and they've become very hostile to conservatives. And so you're put into a position where you have to be willing to fight the culture war in order to defend what you have and just to hold on to what you have. What we've seen in the US is the media always calls conservatives, especially religious conservatives, accuse us of waging culture war, when in fact we're simply trying to defend ourselves from whatever new aggression the left has decided to wage on us.
No, I think that's exactly I want to pick up on it because I think it's a great place to jump off of. First I have to say is, I have to make a confession. Hungarian conservatives are like way cooler. I mean, you guys just party. No, it's true. You got a guy here in a Tucker shirt. I mean, you guys party better. You have music. We don't have music. You guys, there's like a big concert tonight, right? Yes. What's the name of the band? The big band? I can't even pronounce it. Poundgrass? Poundgrass. So I thought I was going to come and play with the band. That's the only reason why I came. But so I'm jealous. But I think there's two things that are really worth unpacking, just to get to exactly the point you made. The first is there are two changes going on in the world in conservatism. One is who we are, and the other is about what we believe. First of all, this fight or this war on conservative, it's not just a European thing. It's not just about Brussels and Berlin. It's not even just an American thing. It really spans 3 continents, because this intense feeling of oppression and destruction is something that's shared by many Europeans, also by many Americans, by a whole boatload of Canadians. I know there's only like 12 Canadians, but like 11 of them are really mad. And a lot of our brothers and sisters in Latin America. So it's not just you. You may have the best bands, but it's not just you. So part of it is who we are. Because, so for example, in the United States, the traditional left, the progressive left, really rose to power by, whatever you thought of their agenda, by really appealing to the common man. I mean, it was reaching out to black workers in factories and rural farmers, and they built a party to say, we are the party of the common man. And actually, if you look today, particularly in the United States and Europe, if you look at the new left, it's not a party of blue-collar workers. It doesn't care about everyday Americans. It's a party of elitists and thinking about how we can empower elites more. The interesting thing is, I think particularly in America, American conservatives never thought of themselves in terms of ideological politics, and that we appeal to some people other than others. But the reality is the American conservative movement has become a blue-collar movement. It's become something that's embraced by everyday Americans, and that's why I think it also has much in common with what's going on in Latin America and what's going on in Europe and places like Hungary, because it's everyday people that want something different. And so, look, we as elitist conservatives can be super proud, that people are rallying to our cause, but the reality is conservatives didn't embrace everyday Americans. Everyday Americans embraced conservatives because they wanted something different. So what defines you is that you're rebels. You're angry. You want a place to live that's normal. And people want to take that away from you. And that, I think, is something that defines who we are and our place in the culture war. But the other issue is, what do we believe in? Because you made a great point that, we've had the one common thing about conservatives has never been about our orthodoxy, right? We've never had a pure conservative orthodoxy. Like, this is what defined a conservative. Progressivism is fundamentally about defining what the orthodoxy is and then making sure nobody strays from that. And if it does, they do take away their credit card and their Tesla. Conservatives have always been a feisty lot about debating how to really achieve and embrace liberty. And so there are different ideological points of view in it. But what's driving modern conservatism is not really about ideology, it's issues. And this is the point I'd like to leave us with, because I think, particularly as I look across the transatlantic debate, there are 3 things that, to me, really animate all conservatives in one form or another. And there are 3 issues that are fundamental, and I hope we can maybe unpack them a bit here. One is immigration. The idea that you don't get to define who your nation is and what its character and what its civilization is. Another one is, we could call it the woke issues, which I think you described well. And it's a big family of issues, and they're not the same every place in the world, but they're all about fighting somebody that's trying to fundamentally transform your country into something else. And the third one, which to me is kind of bizarre, that this is a political thing, but it's energy. Energy and the environment have become the most politicized issue in the world today, and potentially the one most destructive to your future and your freedom and your prosperity. So I think if somebody asked me today, what is a conservative? I would say people that are really worried down to their soul about those three things, those are my brothers and sisters, and that's our trench line in the culture war.
I have to say, though, that I just want to jump in on that. I think that one of the most, at least in the United States, it's not so in Hungary, but in the United States, one of the most telling aspects about conservatism and the culture war is that the Washington Republicans have been absent from most of these important fights. You look at somebody like Tucker Carlson was setting the agenda for the conservative movement. Rush Limbaugh before him. You look at an activist like Christopher Rufo, who was here in Hungary earlier this year. Chris Rufo, this one activist, has done more to change actual policies on the ground in the United States than all the Republicans in Congress. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Yeah, so what's interesting about that, and there are some real brave souls in the conservative movement. I would certainly put Chris and Tucker in that. But Tucker's a good example. I mean, I've known Tucker forever. Back when he was hey, we've got a stupid liberal guy. Let's find a slightly smarter conservative guy to argue with him. But the difference now is Tucker is pushed to the head of an army. So Tucker's been around forever, and he's always been Tucker. And the one thing I love about him and Chris and folks and Andy Ngo, for example, and some others is they know who they are and they know what they believe in, and they've always been fighting that fight, and many of our friends and icons in the conservative movement have been the same way. The difference today is hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, will line up to hear Tucker tonight. And the reason for that is because it's not that Tucker has something to tell them. They have something to tell the world. They are not happy with what's going on. They want change. And if that person on the stage is singing their tune, then that's their band.
But we're the politicians, not named Donald Trump, who voiced this. I don't think we have them on the right. I mean, it shouldn't be the case that a media figure like Tucker or an outside activist like Chris Rufo is carrying the ball here when you have a Congress full of politicians who ought to be leading.
Yeah, well, I want to...
I was just going to say one amazing thing that Chris Rufo has done is just show you what it actually looks like when the left wins its cultural war. I mean, 30 years ago or 40 years ago when they were coming on the scene, it's kind of like the serpent in the Garden of Eden saying like, just, eat this fruit and everything will be wonderful and you can have complete freedom and like all the horrible strictures of traditional culture will go away. And then the result turns out to be like the drug-addled streets of San Francisco, which is now an open-air drug market, and the Soros-backed prosecutors come in and say, this law enforcement system is too strict, it's too harsh. We should just let everyone back out on the streets. And it's like, well, now all you have to do to be successful in this fight is to show what the results are. It's not like an abstract comparison. We now know what the other side looks like, what it looks like when that's in charge. And so, as you said, James, like ultimately we're fighting for something that should be normal and should be taken for granted. Like we had a gigantic festival for 3 days in Budapest over the weekend, completely orderly. Everyone had a wonderful time. That was in many ways the expression of a functioning culture and a functioning society and a functioning law enforcement system and everything else. So we have to hang on to that and make sure that we are aware what the alternative is, because it hides itself.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for not inviting me to the big festival. But
next year.
No, there's something in what both of you guys said that is really important. Why have our elites failed us, right? And your argument about, hey, in Budapest, we have thousands of people that come out and celebrate being normal, right? And they're not ashamed of that. Well, that's because these are both case studies in part of the progressive counter way they went, right? Which is you must capture all the elite institutions. Because if it's no longer a party of everyday people, no longer a party of what people want in their homes and in their families and on their paycheck, you have to control all the institutions that tell them what is right and proper. And that certainly happened in America, and I think that answers your question, is why do people gravitate to voices like Chris and Tucker? It's because they've broken through the establishment, right? But to your point, and I think this is what the lesson of Hungary is very important, what Hungarian conservatives have managed to do in a relatively brief time is really create a conservative civil society in soil that was almost poisoned against that, where there was an EU normality which had been declared, and every country must live by that, and you cannot have institutions that violate that. And what Hungarians have deliberately done is not to create an alternative universe, but to create institutions like MCC, which give conservatives their own institutional voice. And so they can speak out, and that's why you can have thousands of people show up at an MCC Fest or at a Trump rally.
But that's why conservatives here take culture seriously as a political matter. You know, in the United States, conservatives have been following this sort of Reagan-esque gospel, this idea that, oh, no, let's let civil society take care of itself, government shouldn't be involved, and the left has completely wiped this out, and that's why the left owns all the cultural high ground now. In Hungary, I think Prime Minister Orbán understood that this is how it works, and said that if we sit back and let it happen and not do anything about it, we're going to get massacred, as conservatives have in the US. Poor Boris, you ask a question.
No, this is how debate should be. And the less you need a moderator, the better it is for the debate.
Except you're the smartest guy on the stage.
Yeah, well, I wonder about that. We all think, and you all say, that culture, it's about the woke camp against you guys, and vice versa, but it hasn't always been like that, has it? The term goes back historically to Prussian Chancellor Bismarck, who was trying to build a German nation state, and he thought the Catholic Church wasn't helpful in that. He thought he had to break its power and influence. Not he coined the term, but a biologist by the name of Rudolf Virchow. He called it Kulturkampf, and that's where the term comes from. If you look at that historic example, how would that relate to today? Do you see any parallels? Is culture war intrinsically something where left bad guys try to destroy society and good right-wing guys try to save it, or is it something more general?
Well, I think that you can't just, it's going to be different in every culture. The Kulturkampf in Germany, in Wilhelm, Germany, is going to be different from in America today. But I think the culture war in American terms, and probably European too, dates back to the 1960s, to the post-war period. And I think that there's always been cultural struggle in any culture. But what made this a war was because the tension between the progressive secularists and the conservatives, more or less religious or socially conservative people, it became too great after the 1960s. I think the decline of Christianity has a lot to do with that, because when everyone in the US at least was more or less Christian, even if you didn't go to church, the sort of normative civil society values were Christianity, were set by Christianity. Well, in the 60s and 70s, that really changed. And I think that the decline of religion has meant that the glue that kept everybody together and set the framework for cultural discussion has evaporated. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse, because we don't have anymore a common reference point within which to argue, to settle, or to try to settle these disputes. And the philosopher Alistair McIntyre, as far back as 1982, saw this happening and said that because we've lost the center, the cult, so to speak, the common religion, then it becomes more and more difficult to settle these issues.
Yeah, I think that a culture takes a very long time to build, and it can be torn down in a very short amount of time. And so on the one hand, there's this urgent need to preserve everything that's good and that has been built up carefully over time. On the other hand, we know that the anti-culture doesn't really have human nature on its side. It is working against something fundamental. We know that people are less happy when they marry and they have children. We know that people are less happy, more disturbed when they can't find the cultural anchor points or North Star in their life. So there is something fundamental in human nature that wants to preserve that and wants to reorient. It's just going to take a more conscious effort from conservatives and conservative governments as well to keep things oriented in that direction, hopefully while the sort of wave of insanity hopefully passes over. So that's kind of how I see the fundamental question there.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to your basic, I mean, there have always been culture wars in history, and what they all have in common, whether they're from the ancient period or the present, is they're not about culture. A culture war is about seizing power. A culture war is an instrument to transfer power from one set of people to another. And I think the current root of this, as I agree with you, is rooted in the 60s, but the 60s itself is really rooted in cultural Marxism. And the initial idea of Marxism was the proletariat, the working class, that would overthrow and supplant these institutions. And much of the counterculture movement in the 1960s was in that vein. We're going to destroy these issues, tear them down, rip them up. That's transformed into those kids then became the educators for the modern elites, which look not to the working class to tear down the institutions, but look to elite capture of the institutions, and then using the institutions to take power forever and transfer who we are. But this is important. It's only a war if somebody fights back. It's not a culture war unless somebody is pushing back. And I agree with you that American conservatives in the Reagan-esque tradition, we don't want to fight a war. We just want to create a society where everybody can just do their thing, right? And that's not the situation today. And so here's how I know it's a war. Has anybody ever heard of country western music? Sure. Yeah. Like 3 people. Really? Can anybody name any country western musician in America? Just name one. Johnny Cash. Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah. These are good. I'm impressed.
But
actually, if you look at country western music today, it is as woke as any institution in America, right? So you have leading country western musicians who basically will tell you that you should have 47 genders and drive a Tesla and never eat meat, right? And that's because, like many institutions, it has been captured. But so we recently had this super interesting protest song. We had Jason Aldean, I don't know if you heard of him, big country western star, actually wrote a song which was basically kind of an anti-woke anthem. And because it violated all the norms of the institution, it was immediately banned, right? And then what happened is literally the next day the video had like 1 million views.
Tell them what the song is.
What is it?
It's like Try That in a Small Town.
Yeah.
It was a song about basically saying, look at what's happening in the big city, carjackings, looting of stores, et cetera, social breakdown. But if you come to a small town and try that, we'll kick your ass.
Right. So here it is. And this song should not have been commercially successful. And it was enormously commercially successful. So literally like a week later, a guy in Virginia that nobody has ever heard of named Anthony Oliver.
Anthony.
Never published a song in his life, right? Puts this song on YouTube. And within days, it's a similar kind of song. It's called
Richmond, north of Richmond.
It's a similar kind of song. It's like, a bunch of elites doing this stuff, not letting us live our normal life. In days, it actually became the top-selling song on iTunes. It actually exceeded Aldean. So, but the point is millions of people gravitated to that music. That is protest music in the tradition of the finest protest music ever, right? And it does demonstrate in America that we have to fight back. And I think the most important message for MCC Fest and for what you are doing here is never lose the courage to be who you are. So as long as many as European elites and institutions in Brussels tell you you're wrong, you don't understand, you don't get to decide for yourself, never believe that you are alone or that you are wrong. Because today I can tell you there's about 150 million Americans who are listening to Jason Aldean, and if they were here, they would be rocking with you to gypsy music.
Well, I want to push back a little bit. I don't think the culture war is solely about power. I think people who fight it on both the progressive side and the conservative side, many of them are not cynical. They really do believe this stuff. And culture war is about a struggle over meaning, over purpose in life, and over solidarity. I think that's why so many young Americans have gravitated to wokeness, because they've been raised in this culture, this very consumerist culture that tells them you can be whatever you want, you can choose whatever you want. Well, they're desperate for something to give them meaning, purpose, and solidarity. They've gone after this ideological, what I call soft totalitarianism, but they're craving something real, something that every human being wants. And I think that it's incumbent on for people on the right to not simply say what we're against, but what we are for. And that's something we've had a lot of trouble with, would you say?
Yes, I think that's true, that the cultural left has become very powerful and has managed to link itself with some of the biggest ideas like freedom and choice, and so it seems to involve you somehow in that process. I think I'm a little bit closer to Jim on this point, because the element of the woke agenda that I see now that really is linked with power is that you don't know what they're going to introduce next. They're constantly changing it, and at every point where maybe you think, now I've learned the correct lingo. I've learned the correct way to speak and navigate the culture in the correct manner. That way will be completely invalid, 1 year from now. And that is an expression of power, because that is how totalitarian regimes operate. They constantly keep you on your feet, and you're dislocated, and you're floating through space, and you can't find your points of anchor. So it definitely is corrupt in that way, and a sign of something. At the same time, like it isn't enough to produce like one or two good musical hits to fight back against this, and this is not a criticism, but the conservative way of thinking, at least in the U.S., has been, this left-wing corporation is doing something bad. Bud Light is doing something bad. Target is selling, rainbow-colored clothing for children. Therefore, we won't shop there. But the way the other side thinks is, we're going to change the fundamental definition of marriage through law, even though only 5% of the population agree with us. And within 10 years, everyone is going to agree with us. And they have an extraordinary confidence about that. We have the benefit on our side of not forcing falsehoods on people. We're not trying to force a falsehood like that. But in a way, now that the culture, particularly in Western Europe and in the U.S., is so dominated by that, it may feel that way to some people. So we have to look for positive ways to incentivize the things that are really good, so that when people get married, it takes a kind of risk to get married, to start a family. And right now, people are afraid of what that means. They don't see the cultural supports. They don't see the economic support. They don't see how they can do it. So conservatism and conservative government in particular, that's the challenge that it faces. It's on the right side of human nature, and it's not working against the things that are true in the way that the cultural left did. But in today's environment, people need support, and it's a whole of society effort.
I can see Rod and James wanting to react to that. I would let you if you want to.
First, I have to apologize. I am really sorry I didn't ask anybody's pronouns before we started. I feel really bad about it. No. So I actually.
I think we're supposed to acknowledge the traditional land that we're on. But we can safely say we do have to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land Of the Hungarians.
Of the,
so.
of the indigenous Hungarians. I think both of those things can actually be true. The fact that that this is an instrument to seize and hold power forever, and it is a fundamental debate about the nature of self-flourishing and empowerment, what that looks like. That's why I did want to just go back to the three issues I raised at the big, because to me, these are ground zero for issues where you say you need a positive agenda where you can't lose on. Immigration, in the environment, which is literally the tool for completely transforming or changing the nature of your economy, and whatever, and woke issues, particularly gender and parenting and family issues. So, and these are issues where I think conservatives actually have many positive things and have a very clear and different vision. And that's why one of the great things about wars is there are clearly two sides, and why culture wars are good and healthy, because culture wars mean you have to pick a side. You have to pick a flag, you have to pick a trench. And the difference, particularly in the United States today, is there are two very clearly distinct ways forward, and I think that's healthy and good. And part of what's made, I think, conservative arguments easier in the United States is we have been so aggressive on pushing forward the alternate agenda that people have actually seen it fail before their eyes. Whether it is immigration, where the illegal population has doubled since Biden has become president, where the President of the United States has created the largest human trafficking network in the world, largely funded by American taxpayers. The annual revenue of a cartel was about $500 million in human trafficking. Because of the hard work of Joe Biden, today, on average, the cartels make about $13 billion. So on immigration, they failed. On energy, we failed, where you see states that rapidly move to green transition don't have electricity to power their power the air conditioners. And I think in the United States, the most pronounced competition has really been in gender. So, for example, I think you guys probably heard of the election we had in Virginia, which the liberal was going to win. The guy that was going to give you more of the same in Virginia, more taxes, more woke policies, more of everything the left loves. I mean, he was literally running on that. And then in the middle of the campaign, he said, well, I don't think parents should have anything to say about their children's education. And Virginia, the election in Virginia turned on a dime, because the people of Virginia actually wanted to have a role of the education of their own children. They actually wanted to say on the health of their children and their bringing up and their morality. To me, that's just a sign that not only do conservatives have something to run on, but in the United States are running on it. And in many ways, some of the things going on here in Hungary are very strong models, because you actually demonstrate things that are actually kind of working.
Well, I would agree that Hungary is a very strong model for the U.S. Conservatives, and I've been saying that since I've been coming here. But I want to push back on the idea that there are two clear sides in America. Oliver Anthony's song "Richmond North of Richmond," and this is a code for Washington, D.C., he didn't say rich Democrats north of Richmond. He said rich men. And I think he's talking about people like us and our class, and it makes me uncomfortable because I think he's right. But I think that he's talking about a group of people who are doing pretty well, while most of the country, Republican and Democrat, are not doing so well. And I guess I have so little faith in the Republican Party and Republican politicians because they've disappointed us so often. We've seen at the state level in America with Ron DeSantis in Florida and other state conservative legislators and governors taking action on gender, on these issues. But in Washington, they've had power for so long. The border is still open. Vice President Pence, when he was governor of Indiana, he knelt down and bowed before woke capitalism because when it came to religious liberty, because the donor class that feeds the Republican Party, they're socially liberal. And I think at the national level, so many Republican leaders are terrified of upsetting the donor class. Plus, I think, and I'll end on this, I think that the working class is not doing so great. We have deaths of despair that we've heard about. So many working class Americans, especially men, middle-aged men, are dying from alcoholism, drug abuse. And if you look to the working class for being strong examples of leadership where the country's going to rise out of this woke decadence, I think a lot of the working class is suffering from its own version of that.
Well, Rod, your point makes me think of the fact that economic policy has been a big part of the left-wing culture war as well. I mean, if we rewind back to the late 1990s, what was the economic ideal that was coming into mind in America? It's like, well, we don't need to have manufacturing here anymore. Instead, we're just going to have soft jobs. Knowledge workers, the first Silicon Valley boom, the Clinton Silicon Valley boom was in full swing. That's actually part of the reason I think that we ended up having such a rapid transition to a more woke culture. When America was dotted with towns that actually produced stuff and supported and those jobs supported families, they were able to carry on. After all those towns were emptied out, the successful people moved to the city, entered the elite university system, and whereas their father was a chemical engineer as recently as the 80s or the 90s, they go work for Twitter or Google, and they immediately bring the kind of most radical ideas from the universities directly into their job. Those are the only jobs that are available in America. It's the only industry. It's the marquee industry now. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, FANG. No coincidence, but so when they transformed the nature of the economy itself, that also became part of this process, and you started to see articles in maybe about 10 years ago or so. It's like, well, the nature of work has changed, therefore I guess we have to kind of help these people left behind, the white working class left behind in Middle America, help them cope, send them opioid drugs so they can numb their pain. There were so many aspects of this. Oh, well, there's a decline of masculinity in America now. Too bad, those jobs aren't available anymore. We have to help them cope. And so this war really took a lot of different forms. It used a lot of different tools. And unfortunately, the depression that you point to and the sadness and the feeling of defeat that a lot of people have, that Oliver Anthony most recently gave voice to, was actually part of their war. They used economic tools, which means, of course, we have to use them for better and for good ends.
Okay, and I see James is impatient to respond, but I would like to I would like to ask something on top of what you have just said. If that is all true, then how relevant can your focus be on battling the woke camp and cultural Marxists? Because what you are saying, if that is true, then the actual root of that change is not ideology at all. Then it's economic change at the base of people developing a different mentality.
Well, I mean, I agree that it can't be answered simply through through a cultural education, for example. Like there has to be a good form of economic development as well that provides jobs that support families and communities, and then those are the places where culture takes root. I'm not making an economics only argument. Rather, in fact, I think that the other side conceived of and wanted a particular culture or anti-culture to result. They called it in the 1990s the liberal international culture, the culture in which people were not rooted in their location. They could leave behind the hard jobs that their parents and grandparents had. They could float among the cities internationally, hook up with anyone that they wanted with no consequences, and the world would get magnificently richer and safer, and there would be more travel and transport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now we can see that was a lie in many respects, and so. But ultimately, they had that political, cultural vision in mind. It's an anti-culture. It's not something good. But they wanted that, and there was an economic component to it. So it's definitely not. It's not the case just that if you change the economy, the culture is just like a little add-on top of it. But these elements have to go together. Again, so we can't just answer their anti-culture with like a couple of good songs and a boycott of Bud Light. Great as those are, but we have to realize that they used tools which ended up causing there's like a gaping chasm, in the heart of Western culture now, where that has been ripped out. So it will take a lot of work to put back together, and that's why it's so important in places where it still exists, here to preserve it.
I just wouldn't. I think I wouldn't over-intellectualize it. I mean, we could have this debate.
I would.
Of whether it's okay. I mean, we could have this debate philosophically about economic determinism, ideology, and everything, but I don't think that's what sparked the culture war. What sparked the culture war was a kid who came home to his mom and said, "Mom, there are 47 genders. Which are you, and do I get to pick?" It's people don't like what they see in their backyard. That's what's animated them. And so, and where I do kind of disagree, I do believe it's a two-sided war. If you look in the United States, for example, and as you guys know, you may not know this, there are actually more Americans than Hungarians. I don't know if you count, maybe worldwide, well, no, I think there's still more Americans, right? Actually, I think are there more Hungarians in America than there are in Hungary? I think. Are you sure? Because every place I go, there's a Hungarian restaurant. So who's eating at these Hungarian restaurants? Okay, but anyway. If you look in the United States, there are significant differences because our states are very large and they have an enormous amount of power between blue and red states. And so, for example, in the United States, the two most powerful, growing, and successful states in the country are run by conservatives. The top dozen most states growing jobs, growing the economy, putting people to work are run by conservatives. So there are very clear divides where if you see what's going on in a place like Florida and Texas, and you look at a place like New York and California, which are literally just committing every kind of suicide you can imagine, there are real differences, and people see that in real life. And again, I think that has direct relevance to Hungary. Like, the people hate you not because you're undemocratic. They hate you because your democracy produced the wrong outcomes. It's not what they want, right? And the reality is people got elected in Hungary because they delivered on issues that Hungarians cared about. And to your point about the failures of the Republican Party, if the Republican Party continues not to deliver on issues that people care about, it will become as irrelevant as, and where we see conservative leaders in the United States delivering on the issues that people care about, they are being very, very successful. And someday they may vote out this government. But in Hungary, if this government's out to vote, it'll be voted out for the right reasons. In many countries around the world, they vote out governments that, well, you've been in power too long. You yahoos have had this for 8 years, so now we're going to give the other yahoos a chance. Even though the other yahoos have like a no better plan or actually worse plans, they should get turned at being yahoos. And then they run the country into the ground for 4 years. They go, okay, yeah, we'll vote the other guys back in, right?
But
in Hungary, people will vote a government out because they're not delivering for the Hungarians. And that's exactly the way democracy is supposed to work.
I would say one thing while our time was short. One thing we haven't talked about, but I think is highly relevant to the culture war, both in Hungary and in the United States, is young people. In the U.S., at least, the young people I'm talking people age 30 and under, young adults, they're strongly on the left on most cultural issues. Believe me, I'm raising a kid who's this way, and it's frustrating. But it's really frightening to think about where the conservative vote is going to come from once my generation, so-called Generation X, once we age out. The younger people are more and more liberal culturally. And I don't see any effective way that we have reached them for conservatism. What do you think,
Rod, I wouldn't worry. They will age. They will not remain young forever. They will become white-haired wise men like you.
I would like to think that they will become more conservative as they age, but I don't know that that's true. Especially if they work in the most financially rewarding fields, law, medicine, the professions, which have they've been gatekeepers that have set ideological tests in order to get into law school or medical school and things like that.
I mean, this is why the structure of the economy does actually matter, though, because like if the prestige jobs in your society are large internet companies, just financial services firms that, make money by like destroying local businesses and selling them to foreign investors, something like that. Then it, like that. Those are the industries that attract the most talented people, and they become liberals. So that's why we should absolutely completely over-intellectualize it, because that's what the left did. Like in the 60s, they had a bunch of theorists, and they thought through what are all of the possible methods that we can use to bring about, well, ultimately even the Western Marxists wanted a kind of communist society of sort. What can we do to create this kind of person? Like, well, we can't have like traditional families with like old school manufacturing towns where there's a church and a school and horrible things like that. We need to uproot them and put them into soft jobs in the cities where they're punching away on computers and are ruthless. And so that's what they did. So the simplest way to create conservatives is to have people get married and have families. So we have no choice but to incentivize that and help people basically get skin in the cultural game, so to speak.
Let me put a philosophical question to you. I understand. Well, the best journalistic question is often, guys, I don't understand, please explain. So I understand your argument that traditional culture is the glue that keeps society together. There are bad guys out there who try to undo that glue. But isn't cultural change also a part of human nature? Society always changes. Culture always changes. So where do you draw the line between change that you consider bad and change that by necessity happens anyway? Do you have a philosophy at all about change that is necessary and beneficial?
I mean, I think that the way that the ancients looked at this question was basically I guess they didn't call it that, but through the second law of thermodynamics, right? That like the nature of things is actually to decay unless one puts a lot of energy into preserving them and extending them. And they said that was true for culture as well. It's true for culture, it's true for politics, it's true for government, it's true for society. I think it was Edmund Burke who said that a state without the means of some change is without the means of its preservation. So it's really there's really a difference between recognizing what changes you need to make in order to preserve something that's good, allow it to develop organically, just as we do with the human body. Something you ate 10 years ago that seemed to make you healthy, now 10 years later suddenly it seems to make you unhealthy. You make a change and go on. Cultures are the same way. But the new model of change is just to undermine everything that has been there before. And it's that approach which is actually creating an elitist society that ordinary people can't be a part of. Everyone can enjoy traditional architecture, everyone can enjoy cathedrals, everyone can enjoy the fireworks over the river and the story of St. Stephen, everyone can enjoy the traditional music we'll hear tonight, but it's the believers in total novelty and innovation who come in and create something that only they can explain and no one can appreciate.
I think that's mostly right. We can't be the sort of conservatives who say things must never change or will be washed away. But I think that we have to have an idea of what is worth preserving and what we can let go. And for me, my own conservatism is defined by my Christian faith. And I would be willing to allow some things to change in society as long as the things that were most important, freedom of religion, for example, were preserved. My great fear now, though, is that we have created a culture, and many of us on the right have been part of that without even meaning to, created a culture of radical individualism where people decide right and wrong only for themselves. Now, we believe in freedom. People should have the right to choose the way they want to live. But we no longer believe in our culture in general that there are objective values that we must all refer to and ground ourselves in. And that's what scares me, that we are free-flowing, we're churning. And not only that, we have created a culture, a media culture and an academic culture where we wish to destroy memory, where we wish to destroy any thought of the past, that the past has anything to say to us. This is what the communists did. This is what every totalitarian regime does. We are doing it, I think, in a soft way.
Yeah, I actually think see if the Gypsy Rock Band gets that kind of response. I actually think it's framing this as a war to restore traditional culture is wrong. First of all, we're not defending traditional culture because we've already been told that what we believe isn't normal, and tradition doesn't matter. So you're fighting to restore something that is ancient and obsolete. I don't care about that argument. I think that if you are married and have a family and a job, your opportunity for human flourishing and enrichment and living a better life for you and your kids is going to be better. I think if you have reliable, affordable, abundant energy, you have a chance for prosperity and a decent life, and the wolves won't be beating at your door. I think if you can control your own borders, you have a country, and if you can't control your own borders, you don't. Now, if you want to argue with me over this, and there are many people in Washington who would say I'm wrong, I'm really happy to have that argument. And we could argue whether this is an idea that comes from Aristotle or whether I thought this up yesterday. But these ideas are better for us, which is why we fight for them. And why, in the end, I think we'll win, because we do have better solutions. Thanks.
We're slowly coming to the end of our time, and I would like to reflect on the fact that maybe 2 years ago I would have greeted Gladden and Rod as dear guests from America. I now regard them as honorary Hungarians. Have you guys... Have you gotten citizenship yet? And James, when will you join us and live and work with us here in Hungary?
So Hungary needs a Nashville. That's all I'm saying. So.
I would say one of the reasons I like living here, and I'm proud to be associated with this country and to advocate for this country, is because it is a place where people fight back, where you have a government that is willing to fight back and not just go along to get along. And I have talked to my conservative friends in America and say, come to Hungary, first of all, come to Hungary and see what normality looks like, but also come to Hungary and learn from the Hungarians about how you can use politics to advance culturally conservative goals, and how you not only can do it, but you must do it, because the left is doing this all the time, and we on the right in the United States are fighting with one hand tied behind our back.
Hear, hear. You said it, Rod.
And that ends it for this podium. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, gentlemen, for all the wise things that you said.